Hello and welcome to Cyberside Chats. My name is Sherri Davidoff. I'm the founder of LMG Security.
I'm Matt Durrin. I'm the director of training for LMG Security.
And today we're going to talk about something that is kind of a backdoor into corporate networks these days: your phone. Your phone, including personal phones, has
Yeah.
really become an identity linchpin. And we started talking about this years ago because MFA, I think, was really the first corporate app that was widespread on personal devices.
Yeah.
And nowadays, attackers recognize that and they are starting to target personal devices and can access things like multi-factor authentication apps and things like that. So that means that personal devices are part of our security infrastructure and something we need to think about.
No, and
So
I mean, based on the information that's been stolen over the years, I mean, it's not hard for a hacker to put your password, your email, and your personal phone together. There was a research project about
that's
that a few
right, a
years ago.
black
Yeah.
hat. Yeah. So sleep tight, everybody. Bye. No, we're going to dig into this today. We're going to talk specifically about some recent news on the Corona iPhone exploit kit.
Yeah, that's a huge one.
And then we're going to dig into some other history of iPhone and Android exploitation and what we need to be thinking about as security leaders.
The Corona iPhone exploit kit was recently revealed by Google's threat intelligence team, and it consists of 23 different, basically exploits for iOS 10 all the way up through the current version, which is kind of terrifying when we think about how many people use iPhones and why I personally would say we should all use Androids.
Oh,
Uh,
stop. There's 5 different exploit
yeah,
chains targeting 23 different vulnerabilities. And Google has been tracking this for a couple years now and just recently released a list of those. And most of them, fortunately, do target dated operating systems,
yeah.
anything from iOS 13 to 17 right now. So just keeping your phone updated is a good start.
It's the same as keeping your just regular software updated. I mean, if you're not running your operating system updates on your phone, you're leaving yourself open to problems. My favorite part about this was how Google actually got their hands on the underlying workings of this exploit
Yes,
kit.
this was kind of
Yeah.
amazing.
So they've been studying this for a while now, and they intercepted an attack against a system where the attacker had left it in debug mode,
Oh,
which meant that all of it was clear text and they could actually see everything that the application was doing, which is how they were able to find the exploits, find the URLs for them, find everything that went along with this kit. And without that one mistake, they may not know the level of information they know right now. Like we might be completely blind to this.
right.
Yeah.
And I know that they found this, I think in the early days, they found it on hacked Ukrainian websites.
Yeah. It was used for water and hull attacks in the Ukraine. Yeah.
Yes. And then they also started to see it on websites based out of China as well, targeting cryptocurrency users. And there's some alerts. We'll include a link to their research in the
Mhm.
show notes. But the websites will pop up an alert if you're not using iOS and say, please, for best
Yeah.
performance or something like that, visit using an iOS device.
Yeah.
And
It'll
then
ask you to
you
log
get
on.
hacked.
Ask you to log on
Follow
with
the
an iPhone or
instructions
iPad.
to get hacked, please.
Sneaky.
So what is it capable of doing?
So it basically provides root access to the iPhone itself.
Right.
They talked about a specific loader that gets onto the phone and it allows access to basically everything the operating system can do. So they can access things like your photos, messages, so iMessage. It can access your microphone,
Right.
so it can hear what's happening on the device. Yeah, I mean it's full
MFA
control.
apps. I
Yeah.
mean, back to identity, it can access your MFA apps. It
Hmm.
can access your password managers. It can access corporate email. It can access software as a service sessions and tokens. So, with access to someone's phone, you can act as them.
Yeah.
You really have access to their identity. And I think that's really key for security leadership to understand.
Well, I think one of your notes here puts it perfectly. You can get corporate identity access without ever touching the corporate network.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
And then that makes it really almost impossible to detect.
And there's some things we can do to lock that down. I think it's becoming really commonplace if you're using a mobile device management solution, for example,
Hmm.
to scan the phone and make sure it's up to date, or at least reasonably so, to make sure there
Yeah.
aren't major vulnerabilities. Many organizations do not do that, but it's really good best
Oh, it's a
practice, like
great
good
idea to do it.
hygiene. We can't just be like, oh, it's their personal phone. Don't worry about it. If you're using it, even for something that seems as simple as MFA, that is the key to your kingdom.
Yeah, Microsoft has some really nice built-in tools that can do that for you.
Right.
You have to pay for them, but yeah.
Yes. So you were also talking to me about Pegasus.
Oh, yeah, Pegasus. So these kind of attacks actually these kind of loader payloads and exploit chain kits go back like a while.
I'm ready for my history lesson.
So Pegasus was, kind of like one of the granddaddy versions of this kit. And this
Okay.
was used for basically anti-activism, spying, espionage, things like that. It originally came out in 2016. So we're going back a decade at this point. But it operated kind of on the same protocols that Coruna does. It targeted a series of exploits in the Apple iOS operating system, and it was specifically going after your iMessage system at that point.
Was it produced by a company like NGO Group or
Yeah,
something like that?
it was developed by a group called the NSO Group.
Okay.
And they were actually sanctioned a few years ago, and put on the OFAC list. So, if you live in the U.S., you can't do business with them anymore. But yeah, this was essentially, and I remember hearing about this. It was originally marketed as productivity software, so that you could monitor what your employees were doing.
Makes somebody productive, I
There's a
guess.
lot of malware toolkits that advertise themselves that way, so that's nothing new.
Interesting.
But yeah, again, you could access messages, recorded calls. You could get to basically anything on the phone, and they were going after journalists and diplomats, and people who probably don't want their very sensitive information getting out there, or where foreign governments might really want to know what sensitive information they have. So
Well,
yeah,
I think it's interesting because we're seeing this shift that used to be, these tools used to be for nation state governments
yeah,
in a lot of cases. And now we're seeing more and more that adversaries are targeting money, again,
sure.
targeting the cryptocurrency wallets or even just access to your network and your environment.
Mhm.
So that's one piece of how mobile devices are being attacked these days. I think the other piece, in addition to exploits, we also have to worry about just apps that are vulnerable or have potential backdoors
Yeah,
and things like that.
there's a huge number of applications that are vulnerable on both iOS and Android.
Well, and I know one thing you flagged in the news recently was a study of mental health apps
Yeah. Like
that
147 million different application or downloads of applications that are built for kind of like self-help mental health services, that contain just glaring vulnerabilities.
yeah, there were researchers at a company called Oversecure that
Mm,
studied 10 applications, and they found medium to high criticality vulnerabilities in them, which is scary because that mental health information, number one, goes for potentially thousands of dollars on the dark web.
it's big.
It can certainly result in scary situations like extortion or things like that, or even just personal information being sold.
Yeah.
But what else caught your attention about that?
So there are a couple of things. I mean, these are all the same kind of vulnerabilities that we've seen for years. And we actually have a webinar from like 3 years ago where we talk about this. We talk about it from the Android point of view. But at that point in time, I mean, there were statistics that like 60 some percent of Android devices and like nearly 50% of iOS devices have insecure apps installed on
Yeah, right now there was a recent report by Zimperium. I think it was their global mobile threat report in 2025
them. Mhm.
that said 61.2% of Android devices and almost 50% of iOS devices are running outdated operating systems.
Yeah, and this is a widespread problem. We talked about this in the actual webinar, but for some reason, people don't usually think about the security of the applications they're using on their mobile phone. They'll think about what they're using on their computer, but not on the phone because just something about it seems nice and safe, like nothing bad's ever going to happen. But
Yeah, it's my phone. It's like my best friend. I keep it in
exactly,
my pocket. It couldn't possibly be totally hacked.
but we know that's not true. Like we know that, well, in some cases they are. But it leads to the interaction they have with like corporate environments, and why we're talking about this today. If you are using a personal device and you are interacting with your corporate environment and you have vulnerable or hacked software running on there, that could be the conduit for someone to get into your network. And a lot of times that traffic is not put under the same kind of scrutiny that regular computer traffic would be. So it's kind of a blind spot.
It's definitely outside the traditional
Yeah.
perimeter. And unfortunately, again, this is your phone is such a key part of your identity that
Mhm.
these days we really need to be including it in our corporate security programs.
My favorite one was right down here. 25.2% of devices cannot upgrade to new operating system versions.
Wow.
So, yeah, if you've got somebody who's still running, iOS 13 on an old iPhone on your network,
Yeah, what's the cost of an incident versus the cost of getting someone a new mobile device?
yeah,
There's some rationale for shifting back to corporate owned devices in some cases, but
I could see the benefit to it. Yeah, yeah. I
yeah.
mean, if people aren't keeping up to date, that becomes a security hole.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
All right. So, how can we protect against this? And how do we need to adapt our security programs to take this into account? Because I think a lot of us do.
we need to stop using mobile devices.
No, I'm dead without my phone. Number one, treat mobile devices as part of your identity infrastructure, really a critical part of your identity infrastructure. If someone is using their mobile device for multi factor authentication, that alone means that you need to include it in your security program.
Most common enterprise application on personal mobile devices is MFA. So,
Yep,
yeah,
absolutely. According to Matt Durrin, you heard it here
it's
first.
not just according to me.
What's number 2?
Number 2, we want to make sure that we're controlling high-risk applications on work-enabled phones. So when we're talking about work-enabled phones, this is basically anything, whether it's a corporate phone or whether it's something that you are issuing out to your employee base at this point. Make sure that you've got some kind of mobile device control that will help to, at the very least, make sure that things are up to date, that the configurations on the phone are correct, that the security configurations are at least nominal. And yeah, don't open up a hole in your
We
network
need
like that.
standards. We
Yes.
need standards. Yes. Also, make sure you are continuously vetting apps. And we saw this with actually the browser plugins issue, where these were they based out of China? These
No,
developers.
they're all over the world.
Oh,
But
all
the
over
ones,
the world.
yeah,
These apps were really just quietly lurking for years, accumulating millions of downloads, and then boom, they suddenly turned evil.
Yeah.
So make sure that you're continuously vetting apps, not just like one and done, and then 10 years later you find out you've been hacked.
Yeah.
We don't do that.
If you do have people using personal mobile devices at work, minimize the data that you have on there. You've got your slide that we always use when we do our talks and classes about how data is hazardous waste. And
It's not waste, it's hazardous material.
whatever.
It's not always waste.
Yeah. I mean, if it's going to be winding up on someone's phone, make sure there is some level of control. And in fact, if they're using a personal mobile device, I mean, we've talked to clients.
Try
about this
having
before.
no downloads
Yeah,
on the
exactly.
personal
Like-
phone, or like sandbox
Yeah,
that.
you can access certain applications through a sandbox, but you can't download or alter anything about that environment.
I think everybody's turning into hippies because
Mhm.
now that devices are consistently encrypted, they're like, whatever, it's okay to download lots of data. But no, we do need to actually, if you reduce the data, you reduce your risk. That's
Yep.
the bottom line.
Fair enough.
Okay, reevaluate BYOD for privileged users. This is hard because it's always going to be like your C-level executives, and I've been one of them. It's always going to be your C-level executives that are going to want to simplify and use their own devices if possible. But if someone has a highly privileged role, especially IT, honestly, it probably makes sense in a lot of cases to get them a dedicated corporate device. So really think about who has that privileged access and whether it just might make sense to issue them a corporate device to minimize risk.
And don't just make exceptions for them because they don't want to do the thing.
Exactly. Yeah.
All right, finally, make sure you include mobile in your incident response planning.
Oh, this has got to
Yeah.
be your favorite.
This
to
is
do
my
all those
favorite.
tabletop
since
exercises.
This is where we would do this, in a tabletop. Make sure that if you're looking at ways to secure your network or ways to find out who broke into your network, that you include mobile devices in that scope of information, because it'd be really easy to overlook it and you could end up missing a hole that would allow someone to just walk back in after you started recovery.
Okay, how would you work mobile devices into a tabletop?
So I would probably have something like a poisoned application
Ooh,
that would allow for credentialed access into something like Microsoft 365.
ooh,
And now we have the MFA as well because we've got the phone.
I like it.
So there we go.
Okay, there you go. There's your next tabletop idea. All right, everybody, thank you so much for tuning into Cyberside Chats. Thank you, Matt, for handling that curveball.
Of course.
Please like and subscribe, and we'll see you next week.